Welcome to Glocal Voices, the official podcast of the Center for Socially Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina.
Well, welcome again to Glocal Voices. I'm Taiwo Afolabi, and we're really excited to be at IDIERI 2025 at the University of British Columbia, where researchers, drama, practitioners, applied theater practitioners, theorists, all together come together to really engage in really robust conversation and dialogue about the practice, about the field, about the discipline. In on our episode today of Glocal Voices, we have Professor Joe Salvatore, and he's going to introduce himself more. But we're going to be talking about his recent book that just came out a few days ago. That's titled "Creating Ethnodrama." My apologies, a theatrical approach to research, and also his research lab at the university at NYU in the U.S. Good to have you, Joe.
Great, happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Joe Salvatore, and I teach in the program in educational theater at New York University in the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. And I also direct something called the Verbatim Performance Lab. And I've been directing that lab since 2017. And in that time, we've created 25 projects, live and video, that use textual data. So either interview data that we've collected around a topic, or what we call found media artifacts. And so when we talk about found media artifacts, we think of clips from political debates or political speeches. We've even used a clip from a sporting event, and we ask actors to engage in verbatim performance, which we define as the precise portrayal of an actual person using their exact speech and gestural patterns as a data source for investigation. So literally word for word and gesture for gesture. And I think that piece around the specificity is what we're really trying to do a lot of research and investigation about for two reasons. One, we feel like when an actor sits in the speech and gestural pattern of someone who they're quite different from, they have the potential to gain some empathetic responses to that, right? Because we kind of think of it as a kind of a physiological version of that take a walk in someone else's shoes idea. And what we've discovered over the years that we've been doing this is that when you begin to sit in someone else's breath pattern, that you begin to discover things about what might have been happening for that person in the moment of delivery. And so that's what makes the media artifact work quite interesting, because we've used it in looking at political debates in the United States. And the other piece of that work is that we often ask folks to portray a cross identity. And so I might interview, let's say, a woman, but then I would play her story back. And so the idea there is when an audience experiences that story in a different bodied individual, how might that awaken a criticality in them so that they are actually hearing what's being said rather than simply consuming it based on the identity of the person who's speaking.
Interesting. So you're using all of these methods to really evoke this critical audience.
Yes.
Rather than just this idea of just audience consuming and consuming and
Exactly.
consuming.
Yeah, I mean, what I like to think about it in, if we think about media consumption, right? We are bombarded by media all the time that is really constructed. It's constructed narratives based on the perspective of who is doing the articulation and what their positionality is. And so when we ask an actor, and we refer to them as ethno actors, right, using that ethno root because of what they're doing, and we attempt to, through that investigation, we think that it sort of awakens an audience, and it's a very Brechtian, approach, right? Yep, exactly. So that defamiliarization, a political intervention into the blindingly familiar is how Meg Mumford describes it in her book on Brecht. And so that sort of awareness allows folks to engage in a conversation that they might not otherwise have been willing to have simply on their own consumption of the material. So when we look at media, we're frequently, we sort of take it in, and I think of this as it relates to food, right? So if you take in the food and you don't chew it very well, right, three things happen, right? You either get sick and don't feel very good, right? And I think more than ever, there's like a general malaise in the world, right, around all the things that are happening that are upsetting. Another thing that happens is that if you eat quickly, you literally will vomit, right, throw up, and that's what people are doing all over their social media channels, right? They're just sort of spewing toxic things into the world. And then the other piece is, or you choke, right? If you don't chew carefully, if you don't really pay attention to how you're eating, you choke, you lose oxygen, and you become paralyzed, right? And so I actually think that that's happening with media for us all the time. And so when we can ask folks to look at a clip of a political debate, for example, and change the identities of who's speaking, and even maybe flip the gender or the race or ethnicity, folks see what's happening and hear what's happening in a different way, and that forces them to pay closer attention. And I think that when we are in conversation with one another, we actually also do the same thing, right? We experience each other in an interaction, we consume each other very quickly, and oftentimes we don't hear what's actually being said. And so when we do this with interview data, we do similar kinds of casting, not always, but sometimes, and that creates this distancing that folks begin to hear differently than if the identity of the actor matched the original person.
It's really interesting you kind of presented this way. One of the things I love about your work is really creating the condition. For me, I describe it as creating a social condition where people can see differently, think differently, hear differently. That idea of deep listening, and a condition has to be created to make that happen.
Yes.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I really appreciate the framing that way, because that the conditions are not made, right? Like, I mean, we are frequently sort of the conditions are being applied to us in a way, and so I like that's such a great way to frame it, and I really appreciate that language.
Oh, thank you. Is there any specific example, before I move to your book, which congratulations, by the way, we're going to talk about that in a sec. Any example of a recent work that you've done in the lab that you want to share?
Yeah, so we in 20, this is recent, it's not a recent filming project, but we've been working on this project for quite a while as a result of the filming. So you may remember in a US political context, the vice presidential debate in 2020 with Kamala Harris and Mike Pence, right? And in that debate, Kamala Harris sort of stopped him and said, he was interrupting her, and she said, "Excuse me, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking," right? And that got a lot of airplay in terms of, how folks felt about that moment. And so I work with a political scientist at NYU who's also a specialist in international education. Her name is Elizabeth King. And she and I and a team of graduate students and other faculty worked on a project where we changed the race and gender of Kamala Harris and Mike Pence and created 4 different versions of a 90-second clip. So, and then used those clips in a random control trial of 4,000 participants who watched the original clip and then watched the either gender or race or gender and race flip, and they answered a series of survey questions. And we're in the process of working to get the findings from that published, because it reveals very interesting things about how political affiliation intersects with the identity of candidates and their likability or their electability. And so I can't talk too much about the findings, but that piece has really stayed with me through that election cycle and then through the subsequent election cycle, because Kamala Harris ended up running for president, Donald Trump was the candidate, and the discoveries are somewhat surprising in terms of how people sort of identify their politics, but then which candidate they lean towards when some identity marker is changed.
Interesting. I'm going to ask you, I have a lot of questions to follow, but let's switch gears to the book. Congrats again on the book.
Thank you.
Creating Ethnodrama, a theatrical approach to research. Do you want to speak more about it? What were I know, and this book is out already. So, what are the key ideas in the book? What prompted the book? What the context? What are you hoping to gain? For readers to gain by reading the book?
Totally. So I was invited to contribute this book to a series that's being published by Guilford Press. Patricia Levy, who many folks will recognize as a major figure in the arts-based research world, she is the editor of this series. It's a Qualitative Methods How-To series. And Patricia had invited me to contribute to her the Handbook of Arts-Based Research, a chapter on ethnodrama and ethnotheater. And so I did that, and then she had asked me to contribute another chapter to the Oxford Handbook of Qualitative Research, which she edited also. And then out of the blue in 2020, she said, I'm doing this series, would you write this book? And I said, I don't know, like, I'm not sure. She said, she basically convinced me that I should write this methods book. And so I teach a course at NYU called Creating Ethnodrama and Documentary Theater. And in the course of that semester, we articulate, we locate a topic, and I lead the students through a creation process, and by the end of that semester, they have drafted scripts based on the data that is collected. And so I basically worked to create a book that outlines the specific process that I've used, that I've developed over a period of, it's hard to say this out loud, but it's 30 years of conducting interviews and making plays from those interviews. And when I started, I thought of I was just an artist doing this work, right? And then hired at a university, and people started to assign research terminology to what I was doing. And I thought, okay, sure, whatever.
I'll take it.
Yeah, right. But I had to learn that terminology because that wasn't my training. And so, there's some irony in that I'm contributing this Qualitative Research Methods Handbook because I've really learned all about that through the time that I've been a professor, right? And learned that using the language of qualitative research actually helped me get funding for projects at NYU. So I often talk about moving back and forth between the terminology depending on where I'm sitting, right? And what my needs are. And so the book basically from project inception through to evaluation covers the process. And so one of the tensions that I discovered in the writing of the book and that I tried to drive home as a result in the book is that ethnodrama is not only a dissemination tool, right?
Of course.
And that I think many social scientists think of it as like a clever or unique way to disseminate qualitative data and findings. And the way I'm positioning it in the book is that from the inception of the project, you should know that you're going to use ethnodrama, right? And that from the inception of the project, there should be a question that's driving the work that you're doing, rather than knowing already what you want to discover and looking for folks that will confirm what you're trying to discover, quote unquote. And then the other piece is that I think that the theatricality that the artist researcher brings to the process runs through the entire process. So, for example, if we're coding interviews, I don't transcribe the entire interview. I choose 3 sections of an interview that are about 2 to 3 minutes in length, because that's about the average length of a monologue that an audience will sit through, right, in a theatrical presentation. And those 3 pieces need to answer the overarching research question and need to be theatrically compelling. And so I refer to that as the theatrically compelling code, right? Because if theater is only about sort of philosophy and sort of thoughts and opinions, if there's no story, it becomes quite boring, right? It's just talking heads. But when you listen to someone unroll a story, particularly if they're telling it for the first time to you, there's drama in that, right? It's compelling for an audience to experience. It's a lot like Shakespeare. I think this work can be a lot like Shakespeare in terms of the richness of the language that someone uses. And so for me, there are 3 rounds of coding. There's that initial round where you choose 3 pieces from the interview. Then there's the transcribing round. And in the transcribing round, I'm advocating that researchers use a scored transcribing approach rather than a flat transcribing approach. And the difference for that is a flat transcript is basically like prose on a page. It's how we would usually encounter a transcript. A scored transcript reflects the pattern in which someone speaks. So when they take a pause in their speech pattern, we hit return on the keyboard. So it goes back to the left justification, and it starts to look like poetry on the page. So that gives the actor a score to read and take a pause at the end of each line so that it captures something about the way the person was speaking at the moment of the interview. And then the third round is what we call the binning round, and that's where those different pieces, we then look for the thematic bins, and we place them into the bins, and then those bins help to structure the play that emerges from the data. And so for me, all of that coding is really theatrical. Like where the theater of each of those moments is really important. And then from those thematic bins, we construct conversations that are fictional conversations between the participants who emerged. And so we use different constructions like a solo construction, a duet construction, a trio construction, a quartet construction. So like I might interview you separately and I might interview someone else separately, but then if the 2 of you are talking about a similar topic, then I create a bounce between the 2 of you so that you are in conversation. And sometimes those conversations are delivered out to the audience. Sometimes they're delivered to each other, depending on what's being said.
Interesting. Good. I love the framework and how you sort of it's the framing, and I'm thinking of love annotation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of how you this is dance and finding a way to really notate the dance. It sounds like that's something you're trying to do here, and I find that very novel in itself.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure we really have anything like that.
Well, I mean, so here's part of the reason why I'm doing it, and I think this has emerged over the years as I've engaged with more and more qualitative researchers. We also distinguish between a buffed transcript and a raw transcript. And a buffed transcript or a polished transcript is one that has removed all of the filler words, the disfluencies, the moments that people pause or stumble over what they're saying. And I actually think that's an erasure of the moment, right? Like it's an erasure of a person constructing meaning. If we flatten out how people are speaking, I have ethical questions about that. I was speaking to a sociologist one time who does a lot of work around immigration, and we were talking, and she was asking me about my transcribing process, and I said, yes, I leave all the disfluency in, all of those uhs and ums, and she said to me, she goes, oh, well, when I'm transcribing, she goes, I remove all those things from because I'm trying to have my participants sound. And then she just kind of trailed off in the conversation, and she looked at me and she goes, oh, I really need to think more about that. And I thought, yes, you do, because there are ethical questions, I think, when we erase the way that someone is speaking. And I understand that one argument can be made that it's more readable, that we're making the content of what someone says maybe more understandable or more legible for a reader or an audience. But I have questions about whether we are taking away something that's really powerful and important about how they delivered in the moment. So
amazing. Well, we're coming to the end of the talk here. Any other last thing you want to share about this book, about the lab? Any upcoming thing that you're doing, or any upcoming project, or ideas and thoughts that you want folks to know?
Sure. So we are. So each year we choose a topic that we will do interviews around, and we're working through trying to figure out what that topic might be. We're looking potentially at immigration and sort of what's a question that we might want to consider given all the things that are happening in the United States around immigration right now, but I think across the world it's an issue. And so we want to sort of think about that. We collaborate with an international education and activism course at NYU. That's one of the groups of students that conducts interviews, so we're always looking for a topic that would resonate with them as well. And then the other project that we're working on is, it's the 100th anniversary of presidential inaugural addresses being broadcast in the United States. The first broadcast presidential inaugural was in 1925. And so we've gone back through and located those inaugural addresses, and we've selected sections, we've transcribed them with a scored transcript, and we want to make a selection and put those speeches into the voices and bodies of different bodied actors and see how audiences respond to those speeches.
Are you going to use AI at all?
No, so it's interesting. Sometimes folks ask me that question, and I'm actually interested in the imperfection of the human actor, right? So when we record things in the lab, we time it, and so we try to get the recording to be the same amount of time as the original recording. And there's also a stage manager who's tracking the verbal misses. And so we always in the lab, like perfect is the enemy of good, right? So the take that we use is the one that's closest to the same amount of time with the least number of verbal misses, that finally I say to the actor, how do you feel about that take? And if we are all in agreement that that's the take, that's the one we go with. I mean, we could use CGI, we could animate all of this, right? But I think there's something about the imperfection that still allows that criticality to come through in a way, because even in the imperfection, it reminds us that like this is a human being. We should be treating them like a human being, even if we disagree with what they're saying. We still need to maintain the humanness of it. So.
Wow, amazing. Well, we've been talking to Professor Joe Salvatore from NYU, and really speaking about his work on ethnodrama, and we have talked about it as creating the social condition where we can see differently, we can hear differently, and we can listen differently. Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you so much
for being part of
Appreciate it. Thank you.
You have been listening to Glocal Voices, the official podcast of the Center for Socially Engaged Theatre at the University of Regina. For more details about the center, visit www.cset.ca.